that will all be working and be available for you in the next couple of days. And I wanted really just to start, firstly, just to introduce myself. I'll be doing a proper introduction to myself and my co-host a little bit later, but just to say my name's Tom, and I work for In Focus, training and consultancy based in the UK. And my role will be really just to guide you through the content of today's webinar and help to set up the Q&A at the end. And as we always do with these webinars, we want to give you a little bit of information about the technical tools that you'll all be using and that you've logged in on. So the first thing to say is you're all logged in on GoToWebinar, and GoToWebinar is our audio and screen sharing tool, as you can all see. And it's just to let you know that there's a couple of ways you can contact myself or the co-hosts that we'll introduce to you all in a little bit throughout the call. So the first thing you can do, and it's point 2 on the slide here, but it's the most important one, is write a question in the question box. And either Louise or Laura will try to answer during the call, but it may be that it's a question that we can't answer till the end of the webinar in the Q&A section. So it's there. If you've got a question, you can write it in and we'll deal with it as soon as we can, but it might just be towards the end of the webinar. Your other option, and it's a bit like a classroom, is to click on the hand icon to raise your hand, and we just use that during, we're going to have a couple of interactive exercises and also a Q&A at the end. So that's if you want to come in and speak, you can do, but you're more than welcome. Nobody is under any pressure to come in the call to speak. You can just type in a question, and as you can see, you shouldn't be able to see anybody else in the call as well. It's quite an anonymous experience unless you choose to join the exercises, and we obviously never force that. So that's really how you can get in touch throughout the call. Otherwise, you're all on mute, and that's because of background noise. So I've had calls where we've had dogs joining and crows. I had somebody join from a traffic jam in Uganda, which was really good commitment, but a lot of tooting and noise in the background. So that's why you're all on mute. So I'm talking to silence at the moment, and after 10 years, I'm still not sure I'm used to that, but it just means that we keep especially for the recording, that we keep the background noise to a minimum. So there are your options, though, to get in touch with us on the call. And I would just say too that for my trainings that I do, we don't have a set script. We've got a very detailed outline. To me, that's a little more natural on the call. And just to say that Louise and Meredith, who we will introduce, who are my co-hosts from Royal Academy of Engineering, and they will be just free to join in at any point. There'll be a couple of points where they will be bringing them in as part of our outline, but just to say that if there's a point where we need a bit more clarification, they will just jump into the call. So if you hear a voice jump in, that's likely to be Louise or Meredith, but they will introduce themselves very shortly. So that's really everything with just the technical details of the webinar. And so what I'd like to do now is just bring up our presentation that we'll be going through today and tell you a little bit more about today's webinar. Just brought that up on my screen now. I'm just going to come back to the start of the presentation, and then I'm going to start to unpause my screen and show you the presentation. And this is our classroom that we're going to be going through, or lecture hall. We use a tool called Prezi that has been around for a long time now, a good few years. And it's an alternative to PowerPoint, and what it means is that we jump around the classroom and bring up the content bit by bit. So we prefer it in Focus as a way of presenting because it makes it a little more interesting, hopefully, and just helps to show where you are in a process at any one time. So we'll be going through the content in the classroom as we go, and we're going to start over on the left-hand side. So what you'll see with Prezi is that it zooms in and out. So we've moved over to the left of the classroom. And I really just wanted to start with some introductions to myself and Louise and to Meredith, just so you know who's going to be talking to you throughout the webinar. And so this is me. I'm the head of training at InFocus. As I mentioned a little earlier, we're a UK consultancy and training provider. A very short bit about me. I've lived and worked and volunteers in, I think, just over 40 countries around the world. And I've been developing and running training courses for 11 years now, online and also live around the world on a lot of different topics, but mainly with monitoring and evaluation and in that side of things, but also around some of the topics we're going into today, as well as the actual application form itself. And I'm what's called a digital nomad. I can work from anywhere around the world. I tend to work from Europe, so I'm speaking to you all from a rather autumnal and chilly Prague at the moment. So that's just a little about me. So if I could just ask Louise and Meredith just to come into the call. Perhaps Louise, first of all, just to say a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rhys and I'm working at the Royal Academy of Engineering. I've been here for just over a year and I am a program manager looking after the GCRF Africa Catalyst. So I hope most of you know who I am, and if not, it's lovely to meet you and I'm hoping to be speaking more to you in the future.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. My name is Meredith. I am a senior manager at the Royal Academy of Engineering. For those of you who don't know quite so much about us, we are a not-for-profit. We're a professional engineering membership body, but in a slightly different way to many of yourselves. So we have a fellowship, but it is of the most eminent engineers in the UK and internationally, both from industry and academia. So we don't perform many of the roles that a professional body as you would perform. So for example, the Institution of Civil Engineers, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers will play that role and we work with them. I've been with the Academy for 4 years now. I have the pleasure of running our Africa programs. So we have 3 programs that focus on working with engineers in Africa, of which Africa Catalyst is one. It's been a really, really wonderful job. And if there are any questions about the Africa programs more broadly, feel free to contact me outside of the webinar. And as Louise mentioned, she really focuses primarily on GCRF Africa Catalyst, so she's the best first step for all questions relating to this program. So thank you again for joining us.
Great, thank you. So thank you, Meredith and Louise. And just what we'd like to do now, just in the webinar, is just tell you a little bit about the Africa Catalyst program. And I think Louise is best suited to do this. So Louise, if I could ask you just to give us all a bit of an introduction to the program, that would be great. And I'll put myself on mute again in the meantime.
Yeah, sorry about that. So for those of you who are not familiar with GCRF Africa Catalyst, it launched last year in September, and we did a short 6-month pilot project stage where we gave out grants to 15 organizations to test ideas. And this phase 2 is obviously a scale-up of this. We have narrowed the objectives slightly, and the main aim is still to capacity build professional engineering institutes in sub-Saharan Africa. And we are still focusing on research as well as giving grants for capacity building. However, we have kind of split this out for this phase, so it's the research is slightly different, and I just want to highlight that this webinar is focusing on the grant applications. And there's nothing saying that there couldn't be a little bit of research included in the project, but the main focus is capacity building. Yeah, I think that's it really for the objectives. And if you have any further questions around it, we can take those later.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Louise. And so what I'd just like to come on to now is just the aims of this webinar and this sort of mini training that we're going to go through. And the first thing is, what we'd really like to help you to do is to complete each section of the Africa Catalyst application form, and that will include tips on how to structure your responses. So we'll be going literally page by page, yeah, I guess, web page by web page through the application and giving you some advice on that. Then secondly, for some areas of the application form, we'll be digging a bit deeper. So on risk management, on project management, well, Gantt charts, on value for money and for log frames, we'll just be going, just looking more generally at those topics and some best practice, both from our experience in Focus and also research that we've done, to pull out some best practice tips. And then in a moment, we'll also be going through more generally at some advice on completing application forms and funding proposals, and going through some of the mistakes that I and we've made in Focus in relation to that. And then finally, it's an opportunity, as Rhys and Meredith have alluded to, just to ask questions about the application process or any of the topics covered in the webinar. What I would encourage you to do is, we're going to say a few times really, is just to type in your responses, or sorry, your questions as they come up, and we're going to just save them and have them ready to answer at the end of the webinar. So if we're going through a particular part of the application form and something jumps into your head, please just type it in, and really don't worry, even if you think it's a question that's quite obvious or that you should know the answer to, we don't think that at all. Any questions are welcome. Best to be clear, and we're happy to answer, and we have half an hour at the end to do that. Likewise, if you have questions on risk management or value for money, you would like a bit more clarification, it's something on my side more, feel free to ask. If I can answer it on this webinar, I will. If I can't, I'll go away and research it and come back to you. I don't think I've ever left a question unanswered from the training. How well I've answered it is another question, but it just makes things interesting. So yeah, feel free to ask questions. We like questions. And so that's our aims of this webinar. I hope you feel you're on the right webinar. Feel free to drop off if you're not. And so what we'd like to do, before we go web page by web page through the actual application form, what we'd be really keen to do is just give you some general advice on applying for funding and on completing applications. And Louise will jump in at a couple of points just to explain things more specifically for the Africa Catalyst program. And so our first piece of advice is just to check if you're filling in a funding or funding application, whether it's for this program or for any program really, the first thing to check is whether you are eligible. And it seems very obvious, as many of these points will, but I will come in a moment to how we've come unstuck in Focus, me personally, with this. But this is a first example that comes from the UK, United Kingdom, and this is a funder who actually promote peace and social justice, and they've said here, well, they still get applications to repair churches in East Anglia, which is a region of England. They don't fund in East Anglia, and they don't cover building work on churches, but they still get these applications. So you will, if you speak to funders, you will find that they're getting applications that just do not fit their own guidelines. And again, like with most of these points, it seems obvious, and best practice often does seem obvious. I've come personally unstuck with this. I spent 2 days on a proposal last year, this is embarrassing, but it was to for a project in Australia. We were a really good fit. We put in the proposal, and then we didn't get it. And when we asked for feedback, they said, well, you know, you'd only be able to do your interviews at 8 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night, I think it was, with the time difference with Australia. So how on earth you thought you could, well, I put it more politely than that, but you would fit. So it's not just the guideline, it's just how, you know, practically can you meet these this eligibility, or how close do you fit it. So the first thing is whether you're to think about is whether your organisation works in the right areas, so location or areas of work, and then also looking at the eligibility criteria. Is it really a fit for your program? And always the temptation is to try and make it fit. I know this from writing proposals. And we've just got the eligibility criteria here for the Africa Catalyst program. So perhaps, Louise, if I could bring you in on this just for a moment, and if you could just give us a quick overview just of the eligibility for this program, that would be great.
Absolutely. So we're trying to keep it fairly open. Like I said, obviously it needs to fit the objective of capacity building of professional engineering institutes in sub-Saharan Africa. But there are also other organizations who are not-for-profit working to improve engineering. So we are open to any not-for-profit organization based in sub-Saharan African countries. Once you go in and read our application guidelines, you will see which countries are listed as sub-Saharan Africa, but it's 49 countries, so I'm not going to list them out now. We do also ask you to have one UK-based partner organisation, and just to highlight that if this is an issue for you, we're very happy to try to make connections, both from if you are a UK partner who's interested to work with organisations in sub-Saharan Africa, please do get in touch. And likewise, if you're based in sub-Saharan Africa and you don't have a connection, do get in touch. What we do ask you to do is to kind of describe what type of partner you're after and what it is that you're interested in doing. And then we can try to help you with that. And then one of the things we're looking at when we go through all the applications is that the application is complete and that all documentation we're asking for is submitted. We will not pass on incomplete applications to the steering group. So I should just let you know that we do have our fellows that Meredith was mentioning before, who are really eminent engineers. They will be reviewing the applications, and they are the ones making the final decisions at the end. But incomplete applications will not be passed on to this group. And then, other than that, we will also be looking at how the project aligns with the program objectives, which I mentioned earlier. And then we have 3 different sizes of grants for this grant cycle, and as you will see from the screen, there is a different budget and different project lengths. So do make sure that you're applying within one of those ranges. I think that's it for the eligibility criteria.
Great, thank you, Louise. And sorry if I left my microphone on there slightly. I was listening, typing, and dealing with any technical queries, so apologies if that interrupted anybody. And we'll just come on to our final point. I think Prezi skipped slightly ahead, so we'll just come back a touch. So the final point was just whether you can also contact the funder or grant maker to ask if you're eligible, or discuss your ideas about projects or programs that might fit, which I know that Louise, you've mentioned that Royal Academy are happy to do, I think, to actually discuss projects. I'm hoping I've not overcommitted you there, but I think that was from my notes something you were happy to do. And not all funders do that, but can be very useful if you're able to get in touch and actually get an idea if what you're thinking about is eligible.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions regarding project design or project ideas, or like I mentioned before, if you have any issues around the partners or what that needs to look like, just feel free to contact myself. Thank you.
Thank you. So our second piece of advice, and we have skipped ahead again, it's just playing with us slightly. So working in partnership. This is our second bit of advice, is just to think about partners you could work with that would add value to your bid, whether you need partners to fill any gaps in expertise or experience, and whether the funder or grant maker can make introductions to potential partners, which Rhys has confirmed that that they can do at the Royal Academy of Engineering. So, which is another useful benefit to have there, and that's to I think Rhys, you mentioned that's particularly, given there's a need to have a UK partner for sub-Saharan African partners, then that's something I think you've helped with before, if that's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. And so our third piece of advice is getting the budget right. So how realistic is your budget? Is there anything you've undercosted? Are the figures based on actual quotations? And if they're not based on quotations, what are your assumptions behind what the costs will be in a budget? So one thing to do is to get a member of your finance team to check if you have a finance team. If you don't, just somebody who hasn't been writing the budget or the proposal. We've come unstuck with this before. We got very lucky. We bid for a UN contract, and it was just a slight difference in the budget, but we were lucky because I think the proposal was strong enough. But we've definitely come unstuck with this before, and we're all busy people and we're working to deadlines, but it's key just to give your assumptions as to why the budget has been written as it is, and to just double check it's correct. Our fourth piece of advice is about tailoring your application. So we write, as in Focus, we write quite a few proposals, and we respond to a lot of tenders, as you all do as well. Different contexts, but we're still doing much the same thing. And the risk is always that you've got a proposal which is quite similar and fits in, and it's just how much of that you bring across and just making sure that it really is tailored to a particular terms of reference or a particular application. And also to look into the background of the funder as well, always really useful. I've just written a proposal in the last couple of days, completely different topic, but there was a wealth of information that we got from the website of the organisation putting out the terms of reference and the invitation to tender, and really enhance the proposal. I don't always do that. I often forget, and it's a really good thing to do. And we have come unstuck. We lost a bit earlier in the year through not tailoring our risk assessment. We're going to come to a bit later. It was a generic risk assessment. Still was pretty good, but not specific enough to the actual application we were going for, and we lost it on that basis for quite a big bid. So I mention all of these examples because, again, these seem like quite basic guidelines, but I know even we have not always followed them. So this is quite useful actually to put together. The final point, before we get into the actual application form, is just about demonstrating value within your application. So just ensuring you've described the outcomes or the social changes and the impact or the longest term social changes, and come to these terms a bit later, that you anticipate to occur from your activities. So often in a proposal, the temptation is to talk mainly or just about your activities, but it's also about, well, what is this project or program going to do? What value is it going to add for a community or a society in which you operate? And then linked to that, and I slip this in because it's my main area of expertise, just how will you measure those outcomes and impact? But there are specific sections that we're going to deal with this later in this presentation, so we will come back to that. And so it's just a bit of advice generally about applying for funding, and a bit more specific advice from Rhys just on the eligibility, and also what Royal Academy are willing to do in terms of speaking to you about your application and linking you up with partners. And what we'd really like to do now is to start to go into the actual forms themselves and to just talk you through the some guidance on the actual application. So we're going to come over now to our main board here, which should come up for you now. And I normally try and go as slow as I can because I realise you're all on different connection speeds. This might be coming up for you at different speeds as well, but hopefully you should now be seeing the green board, the green chalkboard. And what we've done is we've taken each section of the application form and we've now added it to the board. And so we're going to go through literally bit by bit how to complete the form. But we will be going into 4 topics, as we mentioned before, that relate to just areas of the form where we go into a bit more depth. So that's on risk assessment, that's on log frames, value for money, and the Gantt charts as well. So we will just be digging deeper into those. But for the first 10 minutes, we're just going to go through the first sections of the form. As we mentioned before, any questions, please just type them in and we will pick them up at the end of the call. However big or small questions, please feel free to ask. So the first form, once you've logged into the portal to start completing the application form, and we will send out that link after this webinar in case you've not seen it. But once you've added some basic details, as we've done here to get these images off for this presentation, then you can see you'll be able to start filling it out, and it covers 7 sections. The first of these is contact details, and some of these are a bit more basic. So here, what you're being asked to do is just to provide contact details of and the job title of the person responsible for the application, and the job title is your job title within your organisation that you're applying under. So like mine is head of training, but that's what to use really is just your general job title. Then we also ask for a second contact to the organisation who will also know the project and can take over responsibility when the main contact is absent. So if they're away on leave, who is the person that you can speak to in those 2 weeks who would be able to answer questions on the project. That's why a second contact is asked for there. And also, we'd ask just to provide basic information about your lead organisation, which should be based in sub-Saharan Africa. And a bit later, we have a partner section. So that's where you'd put in the detail of partner organisations and the UK partner organisation. What I haven't done at this stage, I have just realised that I should have done, so I'm just going to pause. Don't worry if we're running through this a bit too quickly for you, or again, if you have questions, you will get the recording. But the other thing that you will get, the other resource that you're going to get from just following up with this webinar is, let me just bring this up. I'm just going to share my screen again. You will be getting a guide, and this guide will take you through everything we're going through today. I think we might not have the bit on just general application advice, but everything else is within here. So you can see this guide here, and it's just a PDF that takes you through everything I'm taking you through on this call. You'll have a chance to go through, and it goes right through here, and at the back you've got the information we're going through on Gantt charts and risk management, etc. So just to say, if you drop off, if you miss anything, please don't worry, you're going to have this resource as well as the recording as well, so you should be well covered to catch up. So I'll just come back to the main presentation again. And so that's everything really just to say on the contact details section. It's pretty straightforward, hopefully. And we'll now just come to the next section. So section 2 is about organisational information. And the first thing is the date your organisation was established. So this should be the date you were set up, not the date that you've registered for this particular program. It's the date that your organisation was originated. And while it's not required, if you do have registration documents, the Academy encourages you to upload these. I guess in the UK that would be, it's been a while since I've set up a charity, but it's a certificate of incorporation, I think it's called, but just that comes from the Charity Commission, but just the documents that have registered your charity, if that's applicable. Then what also we also need is the last day of your fiscal year, so that would be the financial year, that would be the 31st of March in the UK, for example, and your latest closed account. So basically to understand and enter here what was your income and expenditure within those closed accounts. And when we're saying to upload the latest annual accounts, this should be for, again, the latest closed accounts. So it's either for 2016 or 2015-16, depending on where your last fiscal year ended. That might be end of year, that might be end of March. It's going to depend on which territory you're operating in. And then we've got the section here on staffing. So we're keen to know how many people worked in your organisation and whether they were paid staff or volunteers. So this is relating it to what we call full-time equivalent. So if you have 2 staff members working 50% for your organisation, it effectively means you've got 1 full-time staff member. Unpaid interns should be included in the voluntary section, not in this section. So then your organisational chart as well, if you can be uploaded in any formats. It's just showing all of the job positions within your organisation. It's normally in the form of a flowchart, but the Royal Academy aren't concerned about the format here, just as long as you can upload that to show where different staff members fit within the structure. And the question on, so also there's a request here for a diversity and inclusion policy, or similar, to upload here. So it's not mandatory to upload it, but if you don't have one, it's asked that the development of that plan is included in your project plan. So something quite important to note there. If you've not got one at the moment, you don't need to upload it. But you would need to include how you will develop a diversity and inclusion policy within your project plan.
Sorry, Tom,
yes, sorry.
Sorry, can I just quickly jump in and go back to the staff explanation? So we were mentioning that unpaid volunteers is going in under the volunteer section. I would also, because I'm mindful that some organisations do have staff members, but they are not currently being paid. We'd like that to be clearly shown in this as well, so then they would be considered a volunteer if they are not receiving a payment.
Got it, okay. Makes sense. I can update that in the manual a bit later as well, if that's helpful, just to make that clear. Great, thank you, Louise. And as we mentioned earlier, Louise and Meredith may well jump in at different points just to add clarity, which is great. So the final bits of this form, we've got the vision and mission of your organisation that you may well be familiar with, just to describe what your organisation does and what it was set up to achieve. So that's for your overall organisation, not necessarily the specific project. But then also there's a question about your organisation's experience relevant to this particular project. So here would be just to explain about previous projects or activities your organisation has participated in that are relevant to the proposed project, including when they were carried out, and also if staff will be working on a project, what's their relevant experience? We need to ask you to mention that as well. So an example here might be if you're running workshops or trainings to enhance participation and advancement of women in engineering, then what would be your organisation's background, for example, in delivering training or workshops? And do you have staff members who have previous experience with facilitation in that specific example? And finally, how will your organisation's capacity be strengthened as a result of this work? So you're giving the details under the previous section and actually in the project details section coming up, but this is really about how the outcomes of the project will, if they will, strengthen your own organisation. So another example here might be if you were training professional engineers through mentoring, or you're supporting them through mentoring. That could be a really enriching process for the mentor as well as the mentoree. I've done mentoring before. It's been a really valuable experience for me. It's a personal development aspect for me as well. So just again, a general example there, but how will the project actually support your organisation, or add value, or strengthen your organisation? So that was the organisational information section, section 2. We're now coming into partnerships, and we've got one more section after this to look at, and then we go a bit more into detail on one of the topics, and then we start into our exercises. So just to reassure you, this isn't, the whole of this webinar is not me just talking you through this application. So we're now into partnerships. So the Academy is expecting you to work in partnership with at least one UK-based partner, but also recommends collaborating with other local, regional, international organisations. So I'll get my annotation pen. We don't have specific points for every box. It's only where we feel we need to give a bit more information. So that's this section here, is just to enter details of local, regional, or international partnerships. And then there's a section here on roles and responsibilities. So just understanding what is the role of each of these partners that you describe in the box above. So we've not added additional annotation there because we just felt that was perhaps a little clearer there. And then the next bit, just let me skip over to it. So then we have a letter of commitment, and so this is where we'd ask you to upload a letter of commitment signed on headed paper by your UK partner. So this is for the UK partner to confirm they've agreed to partner with your organisation in the manner that you've described above in the previous 2 boxes. And it needs to clearly show that they're aware of other partners taking part and what the roles and responsibilities are for each organisation. So your UK partner needs to show that they're aware of the local, regional partners, if applicable, and what their roles are too within this letter that you then upload. And then we've got section 4 of 7, which is now the details about your particular project that you're putting forward for as part of this application. And so, first of all, with your project name, this should be as short as possible, because if you're successful, it's going to be used on all your communications. So it needs to be short but descriptive. So if you have a title of, for example, training young graduate volunteers to enhance their employability by improving curricula, might be a bit long. Just imagine you're going to have to write that every time you describe the project. So it's going to be descriptive, but as short as you can make it. And the project start date, all projects are expected to start by latest at the end of January 2018. And also, just to make sure that the project length fits the size of the grants, according to one of the 3 grant sizes that Louise went through a bit earlier. And also on the project location. So if your project is focused in specific areas, please state those areas in this box. If nationwide, please state the country. And then a really key point here, if you are inviting other organisations, if you're running training in one country and it's regional and you're inviting other organisations to attend, then you'd also need to put the countries they're from here. So it's all about your reach and effect of which countries you're going to work with if it's an international project. And then we have a box for the project summary. So this is an opportunity to tell the Academy what the aim of your project is and give a short description of the project. And here, this is going to go back to our original advice at the start of the webinar about applications and eligibility. And it's really important how that you can show how this fits with the objectives of the Africa Catalyst program and the overall GCRF strategy. So worth digging out those documents, reading as much as you can on it, and then making sure that your project matches it. So if I'm writing a proposal or a bid, I'm normally going back and forth with the invitation to tender, the terms of reference, strategies, the website of who I'm bidding to, just to continually cross-reference. Because once you start writing, you can get really into your project, it's always good to check back that this is actually fitting and is eligible. The final things to mention here, there's a section on ODA eligibility, the Overseas Development Assistance program. So what we encourage here is just there are guidelines in the application documents that are linked to on the which we will send out after the webinar, where you can find out more about this. It's the general guidance for going through this this application. We have a definition here of the ODA, which is also in the, as I mentioned, in the guide. And then there are there's a link to a document that goes through the ODA in a bit more detail. And then finally, before we get into our more specific topics and go into a bit more detail, there's a section here just on rationale. So this is the background and justification for your project. And it really is about identifying the need for your project and why you've chosen to address the need in the way described in this application. So it's important to show if you've consulted with other stakeholders, such as potential beneficiaries or the government or other organisations, but also if there's I guess also research that you could draw upon. It's not always the case, but if that's available too, that describes that need, that's can be very powerful to include. Not necessary, but can be very useful to include as well. And finally, we get into then a description of your activities. So it's where you can give a more in-depth explanation of activities you plan to undertake to achieve the objectives and describe how those objectives will lead to the change. Louise, actually, I have a question for you on this section. If you could come back in, which I didn't ask in all of our preparations, but I think would be quite useful for the group. Are you there, Louise?
Yeah.
Is there a word limit on any of these sections?
There is. So
500 words. I can see it underneath.
Yeah. So under each question where there is a word limit, it will be in brackets.
Perfect. Yeah, I can see it now. 600 words, 500 words. It's one of those where I brought you in, and then I saw the answer just as you were speaking, but useful to know. So thank you, Louise, just to confirm that. So yeah, should have mentioned earlier, there are these word limits under each of the boxes where that's applicable. And the final things to mention on this section, we've got two areas: uploading a Gantt chart, and the Academy doesn't provide a template for this, but the uploaded version should be a PDF or an Excel file. And we're going to go into what are Gantt charts in a bit more detail in a moment. And we're also going to do the same with a risk register. So again, there's no format for this the Academy asks you to use, but we're going to go now into a bit more information about what is a risk register, what does it look like, how to complete it, and that would also be uploaded here as a PDF or Excel. So you may need to convert, if you're writing in Word, just convert that to a PDF, then to upload or save it as a PDF. And so this is the point. You can see our little magnifying glasses. This is the point where we're going to go over to the right side of the classroom, and we're going to be taking a closer look at these topics and hopefully giving you a bit of best practice and a bit of guidance. It's quite basic guidance, but that can often be the case when you're looking at best practice. And so we're treating it as if you've never come across these topics before, but hopefully still will find these practical guidelines useful. And then once we get to the end of risk assessment section, we're going to come into an exercise with you all just to practice and just to break up, give you a break from my voice as well for a bit. But the first thing we're going to look at are Gantt charts. So you're asked to upload a Gantt chart. What is a Gantt chart? So our definition here, it's a type of bar chart that shows the scheduled and completed work over a period of time. And it shows a timescale on the horizontal axis, and each activity is shown as a horizontal bar, and the length is proportionate to the time required for the activities to be complete. And these were created, it was first invented, you can probably guess, by Mr. Gantt, Henry L. Gantt, back in 1917. And we've got a bit of an example here just to show you. So you can see here, I'm going to get my little annotation pen out just to show you. You can see the tasks on the left-hand side coming down here. And you can see the calendar coming across the top over here. I can't control my pen brilliantly, but I hope you get an idea. And then you can see the bars that are going to show the activity here and then how long it's going to take. And you can then see the bars. What you can see on this example too are what we call dependencies. So these are the arrows going between the bars here, show where a task is dependent on the completion of another task and how they're all connected. And in Focus, when we're creating Gantt charts, we do it in Excel. We have our own Excel, very basic template we use. We don't have dependencies in there, but they can be very useful to show how a project links together. So this is a slightly more advanced version. You can find Gantt charts. I mean, there are lots of templates online for Gantt charts and examples. There are also professional companies where you can buy an Excel Gantt chart template, and they're used in professional programs. Microsoft Project would be one. Another would be Teamwork that my organization uses as an online management tool. It has a Gantt chart function where you can look at charts in a Gantt chart format. So that's just a quick introduction to what is a Gantt chart. And what I will do in the guide, which I've not done, is also maybe include a couple of links to Gantt charts I've come across in the past that if you really haven't got one to use, might give you an idea of where to find them. But now we've got some tips really for completing Gantt charts. We've taken them from 3 different sources. And the first thing is, I'll just zoom in a bit up here, making sure that the Gantt chart allocates responsibility for who's going to complete each task, that it lists the deliverables. We do that in our Gantt charts. We have a little D sign for when a deliverable will come up as part of the project. So they're like effectively milestones that you work towards to show when something will be provided. It can be very good for a funder to see that. And also making sure, we're going to come to log frames in a bit, but that your activities in the Gantt chart match those in the log frame is really important. And this advice from teamgantt.com, the more detail you can spell out when it comes to the task, the better, as you'll be able to better track progress. So the more you can break down your tasks and give detail on what the tasks involve, we find the better. Accounting for time off and holidays, we've made that mistake before. Again, it's quite useful to go through and research for these kind of presentations because it helps us to improve. I've made that mistake. I've put in projects over Christmas before, and they've ended up being longer. And noting dependencies if you want to go to that step, so where you're not able to move forward on a project without another task being completed. And the final set of advice, just using different colors to represent different things within a Gantt chart can be really useful, whether it's in progress or it's complete, because it's an ongoing tool. It's not just to submit it. Ideally, it's something you then use to update and to show changes in your project. One activity doesn't necessarily have to have just represent one bar. So a bar could represent a phase and then have activities underneath it. But also a final bit of advice is that the Gantt chart is for ongoing use. It can be interactive, and it's good to empower other people in your team to use it. So that's just a bit of advice on Gantt charts. As I mentioned, I will include some links to some Gantt chart templates, both free and paid for, not linked to my company, but just so you can see what's out there. But what I'd like to do now is to go into a bit about risk management. So if you remember, this is the final part of that section of the form on the project details. And so risk management, what is risk management? The task of risk management is to limit your organization's exposure to an acceptable level of risk in relation to the expected gain by taking action to reduce the probability of that risk occurring, and then reducing the risk then of its likely impact. So the most common way of expressing risk and what you're asked to develop for this project is a risk register, and that's normally a template, it's normally a table and it's often in Excel, it can be in Word, it can be very simple. Again, you can find specific risk management software, not something I've used before, but this is a really simple, basic risk analysis template here, or risk register. And so just to talk you through it, you've got a risk description on the left-hand side. This is a top-level description of the risk using no more than one sentence to keep it readable. And then you have an impact analysis. So this is quite typical, that you'd look at the significance. So this relates to how severe the impact would be if the risk occurred. The likelihood relates to how likely it is that the risk will actually happen. And then there's a score, and that is a combination of the significance and likelihood. And I'm going to give you a bit of an example on a score just after this section before we go into our exercise, because I'd like to involve you all in thinking about risks for an example that we've come up with. But then you have finally your mitigation section. So this refers to how are you going to attempt to reduce the risk and mitigate that risks. What steps will you take to stop the risk from occurring and minimize then the eventual impact if it does occur. And we call that mitigation. So that's the steps you're going to take to address those risks. Now, it can often feel, I think, sometimes a bit of a administrative additional task unless, but when you're completing an application or a proposal, but I do genuinely find risk registers really useful to put together generally on a project. We just started doing it as standard now at InFocus, regardless of whether we include it in the bid if it's requested or not, because it does really help even at proposal stage to think about what might go wrong and how you're going to deal with anything going wrong in effect. So some risk management tips before we get into our exercise. So these were taken again from our own experience and from the research that we did. What I've realized is I've not included the sources here that these came from. I will make sure they go into the guide that you're getting after the presentation. So if you want to go into a bit more detail, we just picked 5 best practice sources that you can dig into. So there will be a bit of a reading list as well if you're interested. The first risk at the, or first bit of advice at the top left here. So risk should be tailored to the particular context of the project. I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we got that wrong before. So we lost the bid specifically because we included generic risks, not specific to the project. It's okay to include some that are more generic and could be used in different proposals, but the more tailored, the better. We also advise here not to include risks that would be considered just basic good practice. I have seen this when I've reviewed risk registers before. Things like, staff don't use the budget or Gantt chart, or even just the competence of internal staff. That we find that they're not competent to do the task. Now that might happen, especially bringing on new people, and you can't allow for that. You can include a risk perhaps that would relate to your partners, staff that if you don't know them as well maybe, but generally I'd advise not to put things in a risk register which a funder would just really expect you to do as a minimum, that you would use the documents, staff would be trained adequately for the tasks. It's more things that are harder to manage, that might be unseen, that might be not things basically that you'd be expected just to cover as a competent organisation, I would say. Thirdly, when thinking of risks, it can be really helpful to list stakeholders. Now, stakeholders is not just your partners, it's just anybody who's influenced by your project. So if you're working in a project to, for example, reduce corruption in a certain area, that could be affected. That could involve a whole range of stakeholders. For example, government and different types of government and different types of government agency. Can involve organisations bidding for certain work, and listing them out we find really helpful, because then you think, well, what are the risks for each of these stakeholders that might impact on my project? Then these last two are about then managing the risks. So managing the actions that will mitigate the risks, decide who's going to actually, it's not a column in the example we showed you there, but it can be very useful. is to have a column for who's going to be responsible for dealing with the mitigation. That can make you look good, as well as being a useful way to turn this into a management tool. And finally, it's a living document, so it's important to keep updating and using it as a reference point throughout your project. And if risks do occur, raising this as early as possible with a funder or grant maker would always advise that. If things are changing in your project, if a risk occurs, the earlier you can bring that to the attention of a funder or grant maker, we find the better. So just a few tips there that from our experience, that we've dug out on completing a risk register and on risk management more generally. And what I'd really like to do with you all now is just to break up this webinar a little bit. It's just to go into an exercise with you all of just looking at an example of a risk register for a particular project that that we made up that you can take a look at. So I will just come to that now. And I'm just coming out of the presentation. I've just paused my screen in the meantime. And so the tool we'll be using now, this should jump up on your screen any moment. This is a tool called Linoit. It's another free one like Prezi. I'm not sure about, I think it's free, but it might have to have branding on it in that case. But it's a really good tool we found for brainstorming and for involving. So I do a lot of webinars with international groups, which I always find really exciting from so many different countries. And this is a way of getting your input on a call and really building up an exercise or a picture here of what just to test some of the theory. So I'm going to talk you through this, and it also gives us a bit of an example of a risk register underneath. And then after this exercise, I'm also going to give you a very quick example of scoring and how scoring is completed in a template, which I've got an example of as well. So I'm going to zoom in slightly here so you can all see this a bit more clearly. So what we've done at the top of the screen is we've created an example. We've done it in more of a flow chart than a log frame format that we'll come on to, but hopefully still useful. So we have a project here, a pretend application for a professional engineering institute, and it's their plan, and I'll talk you through this. They are looking to provide internship opportunities for graduate engineers, and they assume that by doing that, they're going to get more graduates into the job market, more engineering graduates into the job market, but also improve the relationship with the industry for the PEI. And then they're looking also to increase membership of the Engineering Institute as well, because they assume if the graduates become members and they secure a job through the internship, they're going to be more in tune and happier with the Engineering Institute. They feel then that they can then offer more to the membership and add further appeal to their PEI if they're getting an increase in membership, because they're getting an increase in income and can contribute more to their sustainable organisation. And they feel that by offering more for their membership and increasing their appeal, they're going to keep increasing the membership over here. So this is their model. If we pretend this is what they're going to submit to the Academy, what I've done underneath is come up with a very basic risk register to give you an idea of what a register looks like, and then I'll be asking for your help in the next 20 minutes or so just to fill this in. So my risk that I came up with was that the interns have a poor experience in their internship. So we put the interns into their internship up here, but the whole of this model really relies, or a good part of it, on that intern having a good experience and then being more likely to become a member. So we've said, and it's always very subjective as to significance, likelihood, and score. It's really the values you place on it as an organisation. In my experience, funders don't normally tear you apart depending on what you've selected. It's more that you've thought it through and considered it. But I put here the significance is medium, because it will depend on the intern, it will depend on the organisation. So sorry, that's more likelihood that it will occur, but also the significance. It would be significant should it take place. Maybe it's not terrible. It wouldn't be the end of the world. It could be solvable, but it's not. You know, it is a significant risk for this chain. So I've gone medium all across, just to avoid any controversy. But then I have a mitigating factor here. What could we do to mitigate this? Well, we could build. Or we aim to build, sorry, we can build or aim to build strong relationships with the organisation that provide internships. And I'll just zoom out here just so you can see, and assess what support we can offer the interns. So that's my first mitigation. I think there might be other mitigations there as well, but this would be an example. You've got a project across the top. You know, what are the first, or here's an example just of the first risk that you could put in there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, and then what I'm going to ask you to do is just all to have a think about some risks for this chain. And we're not going to do significance likelihood score because it's going to take us a bit longer, but then we will be thinking as a group about some mitigations for the risks that we come up with. So, or just for one or two of those risks. So what I'd like to ask you all to do first is just to think of any other risks that you might think of for this particular chain. You should be able to see that across the top of your screen. So I'm firstly looking for some risks. Now, there's a couple of ways you can get involved in this exercise. You can type in your response into the question box, and you don't have to speak, no pressure to speak, or if you'd like to speak, if you could raise your hand, you see a little hand raising symbol there, I can then bring you into the call, and I can just take you off mute and get some different voices in. So what I'd like to do is give you just ask you to take a couple of minutes to have a think, and then at 5 minutes past, I'll start to bring in those of you who've either written a risk into the box or have risen or raised their hands to come into the call. So in the meantime, I will just put myself on mute. I'll write the instructions also into the box of this exercise, and I'll speak to you all very shortly. Everybody, we're just going to take another minute, so if you have any risks, if you could drop them into the box, that would be great. I can already see some coming in, which is brilliant, so thank you for taking part. And I've got Sanzan, I can see your hands raised and you were first, so I'm going to bring you first into the call, but I can see a couple of other people too. So we are really building up our risk register. I'm going to give it another minute and then bring you all in, those of you who are contributing. Okay, let's bring in your responses. We've got plenty here to add into our risk register. So I'm going to take those of you with your hands up first of all, and then we'll come to the rest of the group. So I'll just ask you to say your name and the country and organisation you're calling in from, and then I'll add in your risk. So Sansan, could I come to you first? Can you hear me there?
Who's this?
Sansan, are you there?
Oh, Richard. Yeah.
Oh, not sure if we can hear you there, so we'll just come to the next person. We'll try you again in a bit, Sansan. So weren't able to bring you in, but Damalair, are you there? Just checking you had your hand raised if you want to come into the call at all. Oh, no luck there too. So we are having a couple of technical gremlins with the system, but let's keep going. So, Angelina, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Ah, good. So you had your hand raised. Would you like to add in a risk for us?
Yes, I would.
Great. So can I ask first?
I was thinking.
Oh yes, sorry. Go ahead, Angelina. No problem.
Oh, did you want me to do the introduction first?
Yeah, I did forget. I got right into the exercise. So if you could just mention your country and where you're calling in from, that would be great. Or your organisation and where you're calling in from.
Okay, I'm Angelina Seganakita, and I'm a member of Uganda Institution for Professional Engineers, and I'm calling from Uganda.
Great, perfect, thank you. So could I take your risk that you've identified?
I thought perhaps the interns could decide not to stay with the companies that they have trained with.
So they may decide not to stay with the company, is that right? Or they may not. Is that right? I've just got it up on the screen now, Angelina. Was it that they may not decide to stay with the company? I guess they might part from the internship early, or
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. They could choose another employer after the internship or something.
Yeah, as well, definitely. Oh, I see you mean, yes, so they might then go away and choose another employer, and that might cause a challenge. So I've got it muddled up there. Yeah, with the actual company, because that company might be wanting them to stay on, so that might affect the relationship with that company.
Exactly.
Ah, got it.
Yes,
yeah, that makes sense.
They might be reluctant to stay with the program because they're not getting a return on their investment. And for a suggested mitigation, I was thinking in return for the training opportunities, perhaps the interns could commit to work with the employer for a certain period from the very beginning.
Ah, I like it, yeah. Excellent, yeah, we got into mitigation, it's good stuff. So, but yeah, definitely agree. I hadn't really thought of that one, that actually that could really affect the relationship with the employer if they don't feel they're getting a benefit from it. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you for going first as well. You're speaking to about 30 people, so thank you for that from all around the world. Brilliant. So I've just popped Angelina back onto mute. We're now going to come into we've got lots of question responses here, so we're going to add those in, and then we'll come back to those of you who had your hands raised that we couldn't bring in. So if you've got your hand raised, please do keep it up, and I'll bring you into it. So from Dick Morling, we've got too few internships available. So definitely agree. Depending on the territory, that can be a real challenge, and can cause frustration, I guess, also with the interns themselves. if that's the case. So that can definitely be a challenge. And then we've got from Dan Carty, employers do not make time to provide internships. So I'd say it's can definitely be the case and can be linked with sort of a reason almost for the too few internships available. So we'll drop that over on the left here. And we've got from David Wield, we've got the company, we've got two here. So the company pulling out of the scheme. So they do that, I guess, as the scheme is ongoing and the internships are ongoing, that they pull out and they leave the intern stuck. So let's just add that here. And I'm kind of assuming if you're writing in your questions, you're less keen to speak, but again, feel free to raise your hand if you have also written in your question and you want to actually come into the call. You are more than welcome to. But we will, and I have kept an eye, and we will be bringing in the hands up. We've got a few of you now, which is great, so we'll be bringing you in. So let's just take one more from our list here. It's got another one from David as well. The intern is of low quality, which can be a huge risk because so I guess from low quality here we mean that you're not able to complete tasks effectively, lack the requisite knowledge, they're not picking up the nature of the job quickly enough, and that could really have an impact on the internship provider, I'd agree, in terms of whether they work with you again. So thank you, David, much appreciated. And we're going to come to, we will come to the others that were written in here, so we're going to get them all in, we've got time, but I'd like to just come to one or two more people with their hands up. So I've got Bamidele. Have I pronounced your name correctly?
Right. The perceived value of the certification, how does it impact the promotion, income, and recognition of the individual? And that's an HR function. Why would one have to go through the internship in the first case?
Okay. Oh, I'm blocking my own screen here. 1 moment. So why would one have to go through the internship? And it's a risk here that Bamidele, it's a risk here that they don't, perhaps the intern doesn't understand this or haven't thought about this or hasn't thought through the value of doing this in the first place. Would that be the risk?
If there's a disconnect between the human resources in the company and the institute, then you don't get promoted. There's no significant benefit for embarking or completing the program.
Okay. So, well, there's not then the opportunity to progress beyond the internship. Is that right? So, or less opportunity then. So, what's the value then of doing that? Got it. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. That's a new one for me. I had a little go at drafting some of these out and haven't come up with half of them, so it's really interesting. And can I ask where I didn't ask at the beginning again, just where you're calling in from and which organisation?
Calling in from Lagos, Nigeria, the Energy Institute in collaboration with Lonadec.
Great, perfect. Thank you, and thank you for coming in and speaking on the call as well. Much appreciated. Great, so that was Bamidele. That's a really interesting risk there coming in. And we'll just now add in, we will come back to, got one more with hand up, who we will come back to. Before we do that, we're going to add in our remaining risks, and then we're going to, in the final part of this exercise, have a little think about some of the mitigations for these as well. So let's come now to the final inputs. So we've got another 4 coming in, so I'll just drop this in. So Dick Morlin, I've got another from you. I've got too few interns take up the offers, which is yeah, definitely a risk. If you can't meet, it's sort of the flip side of that. If you can't then meet the demand for internship, it's not, I guess, in a way, a nice position to be in, to have all those internships, but not be able to actually find people, perhaps, of the requisite quality to take them up. So I definitely agree. And Edward, I've got here risk of gender equality too. And definitely always good to consider equality and diversity, as we mentioned earlier, within the application, and I think definitely within the risk register too. And I know in certain sectors, I don't know with engineering, but I know certainly with some financial sectors, this would be a real challenge in terms of whether there's a balance in terms of the gender of the interns being taken on. So brilliant, thank you. So we're now into our final couple here. So we've got, and we are going to overlap a bit, which is absolutely fine. So we've got now from Oloemi, if I have your name pronounced correctly. I'm terrible with pronunciation, but I think that was right. We've got, if unable to get enough companies to offer internships, so we're going to shift that up here to the few internships available, just up the top here, just there. And then we've got one more, and I'm just going to check hands raised. So we're really building up a really good, strong, in my view, strong risk assessment here. This is like a brain trust in effect. We've got all this input from around the world, always very handy for these exercises. So let me just, Demolaire, you've got the final point here, and I'd just like to try and bring you in again, just to see if this works. So Demolaire, are you there? Oh, I think it's a bit faint, it's a bit muffled. Unfortunately, I think actually now I can hear you, but it's very faint and muffled, unfortunately. Yeah, so I'll just put you back on mute. So sorry about that, Damla. I'm not sure we'll be able to bring you in, but you have written in your, you've given yourself some backup. You've written in your risk here, so I'm just going to bring that up on the screen. So interns may not be given the opportunity to work in an area related to expertise. That's a really nice one. So it's a bit like volunteering. I've just done a study on volunteering and making sure that volunteer opportunities, which I guess an intern is close to that, depending on what they get paid, that it's so important to match it to something that relates to their exercise, but also that they're interested in it, to be able to get a better experience for everyone involved. So brilliant, thank you for that. So we really have got a good set of risks here, which is great. So you can see how a risk register starts to build up, and also I hope how useful it can be just to brainstorm with a risk register with your team. Again, we do that in our company. 2 or 3 of us working on the proposal do the risk assessment together, because it's a lot quicker, and it does tend to draw out some really good examples as well. So we have a little bit of time. We're actually ahead of our schedule at the moment. So what I'd really like to do, oh, I have one more here coming in. So Robert, thank you for this. And then we're going to have a think together about some mitigations for these risks. And again, it's hopefully going to show you the usefulness of doing this within a team. So we don't need our chain now. So sorry, Robert, I put yours in, I didn't explain it. So the program does not lead to an increase in PEI membership. So that relates to the assumption really at the top here that if the internships have a good experience and that the PEI has linked them to the job, they're going to become members. But that makes quite a few assumptions about the funds that they have available, whether they do remember you, how much they attribute, I guess, what you've done to their success as the PEI. So Definitely a good point. So thank you, Robert. So we've now got our. I'm happy to add more in as we go, but we've got our risks down the left of the page now. And what I'd like you to have a think about, I'm going to now go through and to give a letter just against each of these risks. And then what I'd like you to do is pick one of the risks and come up with a mitigation for that. And then we'll add the mitigations to the right of the screen. So we already have a couple of examples here, which I think were really strong from earlier. So intern may decide not to stay with the company after they're trained with them, so the company doesn't feel they're getting the investment. If this is a program for them to get more employees on board, which it can often be. And so our related mitigation then is that interns could commit to working with employers for a certain period. And what I'd like you to do then is to pick a risk on the left. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'll be putting letters next to each of them. That'll take me 30 seconds. So we take, let's say, 3 minutes, just till 2 UK time. I'll then ask you to type in or put your hand up to come up with some mitigations. You can pick any of the risks, your one that you entered or somebody else's, and then we'll take a look at mitigations. So I'll mute myself for a couple of minutes and then ask you to join in. And just as you're thinking on that, of your mitigations, I am coming through and numbering the list, but it's also giving letters for the list. It's just going A, B, C down here, but I'm just taking, it's taking me a little longer to do, so I'm nearly done. Okay, hi everybody. I've finally managed to put letters against them all. Would ideally have done that as we'd gone, but never mind. So as you're writing in your mitigations now, you've got you can perhaps match them to the letter. Feel free to type that in after as well. We're going to take another minute. If you would like to come into the call and speak, you're welcome to do it again if you already have. But just raise your hand. But we'll just take another minute and then we'll start to bring in your mitigations. Hey, brilliant. We've started to get these mitigations coming through. So I'm going to start with the those that come through on the questions, and then we'll bring in those of you with your hands raised. But we've already got some really good ones in here. Again, the benefits of engaging with a group with really varied experience makes this a really interesting for me. So Dan, Canty, I'm going to start with yours. So for the risk a company pulls out of the scheme, there's a process established to allow another company the opportunity to employ the intern. So let's come to that. Company pulls out of the scheme, so you have a process in place that should they drop out, they can more easily find another opportunity to engage with. So yeah, I like that. So it's just giving back up to that placement in effect, which is really key. So just add that in over here. And Dan will take your second one as well here. We're just working our way down the list. So Dan, for the risk too few interns take up offers, you could have a marketing campaign to be conducted within universities aimed at particular undergraduates, which I would definitely agree with. So that would be too few interns. That was point D. So thank you to Dan for those. We'll just add those in. So we already start to build up, and don't worry if you overlap, if somebody has already added it, that's no problem too. So we will now just take a couple more from the questions. We've got lots coming through here. And oh yeah, finally from Dan, sorry, we pointed out C, D and E are pretty much the same risk. So sorry, yeah, they should have been, I was grouping them together for that reason. They should really have their own separate letter. I think I was just sort of urgently trying to type them all in. So that's, yeah, that's fine. So C, D and E should be the same one. So apologies everybody for that. I do agree with that. Well spotted. So Dick Morning, if we could now take yours. So for C and D, you have already combined them together. Contact existing members and companies to see if they can offer places. So if you're not able to get enough places, you know, go to existing members of your organisation, being, I guess, friendly sources, friendly stakeholders, where you can go to get ideas and to get contacts. So let's put that in as CD. Brilliant, thank you. So we continue building up our framework, and we're going to now just come over to those of you with hands raised, and see if we can bring you in. So Sansan, we weren't able to bring you in last time. Let's see if that will work again. Sansan, can you hear me there?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, perfect.
I'll take back to D.
Okay.
Too few internships available. My understanding of that was perhaps, you know, when I take the case of Zimbabwe, I mean Harare actually, you get, you know, the lack of companies where to enable interns, you know, to be attached to. And that is something that goes well beyond the professional engineering institution. And it's a national problem. In the case of Zimbabwe, for instance, we have a massive company shut down, and there are very few places that can offer internship. That was my understanding of G.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair understanding, yeah.
Yeah, you understand it now? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think I would agree.
Right. So that's something, you know, which is really giving us a lot of difficulties in Zimbabwe. We have so many engineering students and graduates who cannot go into any sort of internship because they are simply not there. The relevant companies are simply not there.
No, I guess because it takes resource to provide internships in a difficult environment, difficult economic environment. It's not going to be the priority of a company. Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. So I don't have a mitigating, you know, answer for that, except that, you know, to look at the economy from a macro point of view and improve the economy as a whole.
Got it. So it's more just to add a bit more, which is really useful because this is just a generic example. So it's always great to have an example come in from a particular country that emphasizes this. But so yeah, you're right. It may not be a specific mitigation, but it's like it would add some context to that risk. I think, you know, why we've just put too few internships available. This would explain why the internships aren't available, and actually, in some cases, the mitigation to that risk is perhaps beyond the the resources available because it involves actually the economy improving. That's interesting. And can I ask too where you're so you're Zimbabwe based, or which organisation you're from? Just to.
I'm from the Zimbabwe Institution of Engineers. I'm the Chief Executive Officer.
Great, perfect. Thank you. So great to bring you in. Sorry it didn't work earlier. So thanks for adding some more detail and context to that. Much appreciated. Great. So thank you to Samsan, and we'll come just to a couple more written in. We have lots here actually, which is great. We have time. We have just a couple more minutes just to go through here. So we're just going to drop these in from the question box. So for we're going to have a really risk assessment framework at this rate. And thanks all of you now for using the letters. Now I've dropped them in. So let's see if we can get everybody's in here. So we've got for I, risk of gender inequality. We've got from Edward, organisational and government commitment to gender and racial equality. So I guess that could be in the form of policies. It could be in the form of advocacy to the government as well. So that's great. Thank you. For David Wield, we've got for F, a company pulls out of the scheme. We've got provide number of alternative internships, which I definitely agree. So you can also see, and this is a good point, you can have obviously more than one mitigation. Well, it's not obvious, but I would always recommend if there are more than one mitigation, it might be you're putting together in a paragraph, but it's always fine to do that. Just shows that you've considered it in a greater depth. Brilliant, thank you. So from Edward, we've got a second one for G. So direct involvement of PEI in university or college education. So this was for the internees of low quality. So by getting involved in the actual with the university or college more directly, you can try and see if you can tailor the or try and improve the quality of the interns coming in. So I'm going to just drop that down here. I'm not going to be able to fit them all in against, but they do now match with the letters, not exactly across the screen now. But so the next one we've got here, we've got we've got 4 more, and then a couple of you with your hands raised as well. So Robert, we've got for K. So K is the program does not lead to an increase in PEI membership. So I'm interested in this one because it's quite a challenging one to address, I thought, because it's really at the heart of the whole of this program. We've got ensuring effective engagement with interns and companies throughout the scheme, also ensuring awareness of the benefits of membership of PEI, I guess the value of being involved. Also ensure that internship programs are tailored or structured in a way that facilitates membership of PEI. So nice, so you're already in the internship programs, I guess, directing them at each stage towards a PEI as something that would be beneficial to them. And there's a really nice example here from Robert of how to combine 2 mitigations into one paragraph within your table, which you're perfectly entitled to do, and I think just shows again that it's been thought through in more detail. Brilliant. So 3 more here from Oloremi. We've got for C and D, because as I think it was Dan pointed out earlier, they are actually the same risk that I forgot to number together or letter together. We've got offer incentives to companies that offer internships. This is about a lack of internships, like tax deduction for internship expenses. So you're helping them in effect to take on the intern. by supporting with resources, which is great. Again, I can't quite now fit them all in. I will rearrange this, but against the point across from there, but they are lettered to match up. We've got 2 more, and then a couple of hands raised, and then we're done. So too few suitable intern applicants is the problem. Contact universities from Dick Morling. Contact universities and colleges to encourage more to apply. So I would definitely agree. So contact universities and colleges. That was for lack of interns, which I have not noted which number that is. That was for I don't know if it might be hiding underneath here. We had a lack of interns. I think it could be hidden beneath some of these that relates to. So thank you. And we've got a final one on the questions here. So from Dick Mulling as well. Note both mitigations that Dick's put forward will require an allowance in the schedule for these to be effective in terms of risk management. And it's a good general point there, is that where risk management overlaps a bit with project management too, and with the activities that you'll carry out, because you can see on the left, on the right of the screen now, that you've got a whole range of basically of mitigations, but the mitigations are often activities that you need to do, and so there's almost a next step of going back to your activity plan to make sure that these are included in there if they're mitigations that you're going to follow. So finally, and thank you for waiting, but we've got Bamidele back on the line here, so could I bring you in for the final input?
Yeah, we would require a stakeholder analysis, and then determine the expertise in the companies where we will be sending the interns to, sensitize the HR managers, and get the experts in those companies to commit to developing the interns to fill the gaps where they have shortages.
Okay. And can you repeat the final one there? Sorry, I got behind on my typing. Your final point.
Where you have the skills gaps, the experts, the more senior staff will empower the interns in specific skill sets.
I like it. So it's a really well thought through development plan in effect for those interns going in. This would really make sure that that connection is there, that I guess both sides, if you like, benefit from it. This would be a really detailed plan to address that. I think I really like it. Have I summarized it correctly here? Does this work for you?
Yes, yeah, the whole idea is to get the interns well recognized, well compensated, and to progress in their career and their profession.
Perfect.
Thus so they value the membership of the institution.
Got it. Okay, I like it. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. It's really well thought through and structured. So much appreciated. Great. Okay. So thank you to Bamidele there for the second piece of input coming into the webinar. Much appreciated. So we've now got we've not completed it because we've not given a score here, significant likelihood or score, but that is quite a subjective. It would be very hard for us to do and agree that on an international call with so many of you. So it's really just at this point to think about the risks, think about the mitigations, and give you some practice and effect. And really appreciate your input, because it's come up with some really interesting ideas here and responses, and I think of pretty good quality for a 20-minute exercise. So thank you all for engaging with that. We've got one more exercise a bit later. It's more of a quiz, which will come up in about 10 or 15 minutes. And what I'd just like to finally share with you we did, I actually found this morning in preparing for the webinar, that I'd forgotten that a few years back I had gone into a piece of research. I think I'd looked at about 20 different risk assessment templates and come up with our own version that we use in our company that I'm more than happy to share. But it does give you so it's got a template on the final page. It's a bit more detailed, but we cut out and add in things as we go. But I want to give you an idea of that scoring. So in our version, we give as would be the case in the very basic one we looked at there, you look at a probability rating, you look at impact here, severity, so slightly different criteria, but you're giving them a rating, and then you've got an overall score based on the rating that you've given, which is very common for a risk assessment. So I will include this in the resources in case any of you would like to access a template, along with one or two others that we've come across online as well, just so you do have something you can use. So thank you everybody for engaging with that, and we're now going to come to the next part of the presentation. So we're over halfway through. We've got 45 minutes left of the exercise and presentation here, and then we're getting into the Q&A just at the end of the call. So we did that exercise really just to break things up a bit, give you a chance to get involved. It's just very interesting for me too to be able to hear from you all as well. And what we're going to do now is come back and I'll share my screen again. And so we're now into the 5th of the 7 sections. We're now into results. And so what we're going to ask you to complete here. So the first thing really, we're only going to take a very brief look at this because then we're going to go into log frames for a little bit. So here, there is a log frame template that the Academy provide, and they would ask you to complete and upload that log frame just into this section here. So you can see you'll choose your file button there where you would upload it. But again, we thought this would be another useful point to just go in a bit more into theory and just explain a bit about logical frameworks or log frames for those of you who are not familiar with them. And then we're going to go more specifically into indicators, because we find that can be one of the more challenging elements of a log frame. And then we're going to go into a bit of a quiz and some polls as well that you can fill in to test our knowledge on indicators. But let's start with log frames. So what is a log frame? So we've called this log frames and MEL, monitoring, evaluation and learning, often called just monitoring and evaluation as well, or social impact measurement, has many names. And often the log frame is the basis for monitoring and evaluation and for learning. So a logical framework or log frame describes a general approach to project or program planning or to monitoring and evaluation. And it's often in the form of what we call a log frame matrix or logical framework. And it's normally in a table or a matrix kind of format. And it encourages you to consider the relationships between the resources that you're putting in, the activities that you're running, and the changes that you want to see as a result of those activities. So let's have a look at the log frame template that the Academy are asking you to fill in for the Africa Catalyst program. And I'm going to just take you through all the bits of the log frame so you can get an idea of what is being expected for each one. So I'm going to bring these all up because actually it's more likely you'll go bottom to top here. So we're starting, so it's a table to complete, and what we're looking for here are, for example, listed under each of these topics. So input 1 here, input 2, it's a list to put into this column against which you would record your indicators. And the first thing to think about are inputs, so the things or resources needed to deliver the project activities. Activities are the key activities you'll deliver throughout the project. The outputs are the things that will happen, the changes that occur as a direct result of project activities. So when we say direct result, that's normally if you're producing a guide, it's the guide itself. If you have people attending training, it's numbers that attend training. There's often a bit of a fine line between an output and an outcome, because outcomes are then the changes that happen as a result of your outputs taking place. So somebody attends training, what then happens? Well, you'd probably hope that their knowledge increases, which would be an outcome, a typical outcome for a training program. And finally, we've got the impact, so the longest term goal of the project, and it represents the longest term social change you're working towards. So that would be an impact statement, so a short, normally a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs of what you want to see as a result in society in the longer term for your as a result of your project. So maybe just some example here. So if you were doing a let's say an anti-corruption survey, I'm hopefully picking an example I think that was funded last year, or in the first round of the Africa Catalyst program. Let's say your activity would be creating a baseline infrastructure anti-corruption survey. That would be one of your activities. An input into that would be research expertise, or time from a researcher, potentially, or an evaluator. An output then might be the number of people who are, or the completion of that survey. The outcome might be that awareness is raised from completing people complete the survey and then learning as they complete the survey. And your impact might be just generally a reduction in corruption, but turn that into a statement. So the first thing to do is to fill out your inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impact. I often, if I'm filling in a log frame, start with activities, then inputs and outputs, because it can often be easier that way around. What are we doing, and then what are then the inputs into that? But completely up to you. And then the next thing to do, and our final points here just on this, are the completing basically the indicator part of this template. So then it would be your indicators. So these explain what you'll measure to ensure that the input, activity, output, outcome, or impact has happened. It's good that if the indicators are quantitative, as these are usually easier to measure, but some changes is qualitative, and that's fully acceptable. And we'll come on to that a little bit in our indicator quiz in a moment. And the indicators should be determined to suit the project, but we've given a few examples here. So it might be number of members, split by type of membership and gender, number of staff members, percentage increase in income, the services provided to members. That's qualitative, it's not a figure or a number. It's and we've got existing policies. These would all be some examples of indicators. Means of verification in the column here. That's basically how will you collect the information to collect data on the indicators. We've got a baseline. Have you got the figures for indicators ready? So have you already got some data that you can send about the indicators? If so, it's important just to put the date in of when you collected that data. Likewise with milestones. So if you're going across, say, a 2 or 3 year period, this would be to put in the date when you're going to update that indicator and provide more information. And then the target then is the, let's just bring that up, the date at which, for the end of the project, when you'll fill in your final results for the indicator. So I think if I'm right, and Louise, just jump in if I'm wrong, if you are going for, say, a 1 year project, you might not necessarily need milestone 1 and 2. They might be for longer projects, depending on how often you're collecting your data. And then assumptions would be any critical assumptions or beliefs behind the indicators that you are putting forward. So, for example, an increase in income, your assumption might be that that's a result of a particular activity that you're doing. So it gives you a chance to add a bit more detail on the indicators. So,
Tom?
Oh yes, Louise.
Hi, just jumping in there on the milestones. And yes, so if you're going for the 1-year project, it's unlikely you will need both milestones, and there might not be any change to measure after 6 months, for example, but there might be a milestone for the reporting for 6 months, for example. So then you would put in the date of that report, but it's not necessary to use them.
Great. Okay. So it could be, for example, so a project that lasts a year. Was that one of your 3 options? So if it's a year-long project, then you could still have a milestone in the middle of that project to report back after, depending on what data collection you're doing, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it might be that you're not expecting any change for the 6-month report, but then you could also use, I suppose, the milestone 1 to show that it will still be the same after 6 months, but the target is that it's going to be changed after 12 months.
Got it. Okay. And can I ask too, which I didn't ask before, but can you add in more milestones if you have a 3-year project and you're going to collect data every 6 months, for example? Can you add in more milestones, or do you prefer to stick to 2?
No, you can add more milestones if you think there's going to be it's going to be useful. I think this template is a Word document, so you can add columns if you need.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Louise, for the clarification. Much appreciated. So yeah, this is your log frame. As Louise has mentioned in the comments too, please type in any questions for Q&A at the end if this is unclear. But you will have the recording, but this is also in the guide we're sending you, all of these points, so hopefully will be clear for you to have a look through. The final point just on the log frame here, we'll zoom over a little bit just to the right here. The same indicators need to be used throughout the project. So if you need to to amend your indicators, we always recommend going back to the funder or grant maker to agree this. This is more general monitoring evaluation, MEL advice that I've seen organisations just amend them after a year but not tell the funder, and there's normally some room for some negotiation, but especially if you're showing change over time, amending the indicators or the tools can cause some challenges. So always recommend going back if you need to change your indicators for a multi-year project. And the final thing just on log frames and on monitoring evaluation, we thought it'd be useful just to give you some tips for writing indicators, because this often causes some challenges for organisations that I work with on the monitoring evaluation front. And so these come from a guide that we produced that's free, that you have access to, that we'll send a link to. And we just developed this, and it's going through good practice on writing indicators and also prioritizing and selecting indicators. So, and we have another guide I'll come to in a moment that might be useful. But just to talk you through these, we've got 5 tips. These are for writing indicators. So if you have to write your own ones, they're not already existing in the sector, then we've got a bit of advice on writing them. Now, I use these as a M&E professional if I'm writing a framework. So I'm giving you something that again may seem basic, but I have it in front of me. It's taken from about 20 different indicator guides. So sometimes hopefully simple is better. So we suggest first of all over here using neutral language for indicators so that they don't express a change. So they don't say increase in, decrease in. I'm not sure if we followed it for the indicator examples we just gave. Hopefully we did. But they're ideally a neutral, because an indicator is an indicator of something. It might go up, might go down, but it's basically describing a piece of data. Secondly, to be clear and specific, so vague or overly broad indicators will yield inconclusive evidence. So I think one of the 2 of the ones we just shared, like increase in income, I'd want that to be a bit more descriptive, I think, of increase in income for whom would be quite good to know. So a bit more detail of your indicator to be clear. Would somebody understand it that didn't understand your project? An indicator should only measure one thing, so not including 2 things in the same indicator. That's probably the most common thing I come across when I'm reviewing indicators for organisations. include qualitative indicators. So it's really tempting to have all your indicators start with number of, percentage of. They're important, qualitative indicators, and by that we mean indicators that can be used for comparison. They're normally using numbers or figures, and they can be more easily quantified in effect, whereas qualitative indicators are useful for often for digging into more depth. So that might be like the extent to which, or the level of. It's not necessarily a numerical piece of data you're collecting for that. And finally, not including target or baseline within the indicator itself, because you saw in the log frame there are other columns for that. So it just often can cause confusion if that's written into the indicator. Before we get into our final exercise, we do have another guide here that we produced. Again, it's free, about just generally monitoring and evaluation. So if these are useful to you, we're going to include them in the resources afterwards. If not, no problem. It's just there if it's handy for you. But we're now going to think about these 5 different tips for writing indicators, and we're going to come into an exercise, and it's only a 10-minute exercise, and it's just to take a look at just some examples, and we're going to look at some different indicators and think what's wrong with the indicators. And there's going to be a poll that's going to jump up on your screen, and you can choose a response as to what you think is correct. Normally with this exercise, we would then bring you in to discuss. It would be a really good, really kind of in-depth exercise, but this isn't an indicator webinar. It's just a bit of fun to practice some of these techniques. So it's just going to be to report back to you the poll results as we go. So I'll just bring up my screen now. So I'd like you to, you've got the indicator guidelines using neutral language, including qualitative indicators, which isn't really going to be relevant for this list because we're looking at individual indicators. Being clear and specific, only measuring one thing, and do not include targets or baseline in indicator wording. So our first one to look at, and it's and I hope I've kind of tailored these to last year or the last set of projects funded through the scheme, but let's see. Our first indicator is decrease in reports of corruptions by PEIs. So have a think. I will read it out again in a moment because when I bring up the poll you won't be able to see it, I've just realised. So I'll just now find the first poll and I'm going to launch it, and what you should see on your screen is a is a poll. So what's wrong with the indicator? I'm going to read it out for you again. Decrease in reports of corruption by PEIs. Now, you've then got your options. Is that A, B, what's wrong with that indicator, basically? And then you just add in your what you think is wrong with that. I'll read it again. Decrease in reports of corruption by PEIs. And people are still voting, so we do give it a little bit of time to, we give it a minute while it's up there. Oh, people are still voting, so we will leave it open for a little longer. Maybe 20 more seconds, and then we'll don't worry if you didn't have a chance to respond. I know there's quite a few people still voting and different on different connections. So yeah, well, I will now just close that poll. Now, I should have mentioned, I think I did at the start, these are anonymous. I can't see what I've got no way of knowing who responded to this. So you're completely anonymous in putting your response. So let's see what you all put. So we felt that was not using neutral language. Some of these, by the way, are arguable in different ways. And this is really interesting because 42% of you felt the indicator is not using neutral language. And another 42% felt that it wasn't clear and specific. So I think I would agree on both. We've just got using neutral language, but I think also could definitely be clearer. You know, what is the nature of the reports? You know, how are they reporting it? Could be definitely be clearer for somebody looking at it. It's always good to think, if somebody reads this that doesn't understand our project, would they understand what we're trying to collect here? So I definitely agree. We had 17% say it's to including qualitative indicators. So I guess this is it. Could be either. I guess it's more of a qualitative indicator. They are going to be less relevant, point 2 here. I've included it for completeness because that's really when you're looking at a set of indicators and thinking whether you've got a nice mix between quantitative and qualitative. But okay, so let's bring up the second one. So we've got 5 of these, I think. So the number of users, it's meant to be users, sorry, the number of users who accessed our training portal and reported that they had a good experience. So I'm going to bring up the second poll and ask you again, what's wrong with this indicator? I'm going to read it out again because you won't realize again you won't be able to see it when the poll's up. So the number of users who accessed our training portal and reported that they had a good experience. What's wrong with that indicator? I'll read it out one more time in a moment. Okay, so we'll give it another 30 seconds. Interesting responses. Bit of a mix. Okay, we're going to give it 10 more seconds. We're just going to give it maybe a minute for each. So sorry if more of you, I know you're still answering, still thinking about it. So we will just now close that one, because we have had a lot of people take part in that. So the results of that one. Oh, I've realised I can share poll results. Didn't realise I could do that. There we are. So again, it's anonymous. You can't see who voted what, but we've got the winner here. The indicator measures more than one thing, which I would definitely agree. It's both number of users and did they have a good experience. So if you're trying to combine those two things together, that's not great because you don't know what the data that comes out, you don't know really what it relates to. Again, it's the biggest thing I've seen when I've reviewed indicators, the biggest challenge that I've seen come up. But you can see from the results that 38% of people felt there are no qualitative indicators. Again, that would be more for reviewing a group, but I can see your point because it's a quantitative indicator, so it's not including a qualitative option. And finally, the 15%, again, not clear and specific. Maybe, yeah, I can. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe. What do we mean by good experience? I guess you could go into a bit more detail on that. But I think it's probably relatively clear. But I think you could make that argument in a bit more detail. So brilliant, thank you for that. We've just got three more, and the next one, 50% increase in female engineers joining PEIs in Rwanda over a 2-year period. So using neutral language, including qualitative indicators, be clear and specific, only measure one thing, do not include targets or baselines in indicator wording. What do you all think is wrong with this? Let's get rid of this and bring up that next poll. And it will launch on your screen any moment. So now you've got it up. What's wrong with this? 50% increase in female engineers joining PEIs in Rwanda over a 2-year period. What do you think's wrong with that one? so let's have a look at the results here. So thank you all for engaging in this. Oh, and one or two of you have written it into the question box too, which you're welcome to do. But let me just shut this, close this poll and share the results. So you can see an overwhelming number of you, 60%, felt that there were targets and baselines included in this indicator, which we don't tend to advise including within an indicator. Often causes confusion. It's more of an in-focus regulation or suggestion. It's not always the case with indicators, but it's what we recommend or we suggest. So let's have a look. We also had not using neutral language. I don't think anybody went for that, but we've also put increase here. So increase wouldn't be neutral. It would already be assuming the indicator is going to go one way or another. And the neutral indicators is a very common guideline across indicator guides. And we had, again, 27%. There are no qualitative indicators. That's true. It is a quantitative one. It could be balanced out with others in the group. Brilliant. So thank you for that. We're going to come to just two more. So here we go. Increase in well-being of participants. So what's wrong with that? Increase in well-being of participants. This is our penultimate one. I'm just going to launch it up. So a final reminder there, increase in well-being of participants. You could say that's really a qualitative indicator this time, so it's not going to be 0.2. And so, yeah, so well-being would be sort of their feelings of self-worth, how generally they feel day by day. I think there are two possibilities here. I think we've mentioned one, but I think there are two. And we'll just give it another 20 seconds. So 10 seconds. Okay, so let's close that poll. Almost all of you voted there, so much appreciated. And I'll share the results with you and see what we said. So we said it's not using neutral language, and 19% of you came up with that. But I would really agree with the 69% of you who came up with the indicator not being clear and specific, because it is quite general. I mean, it's qualitative, so often they may not be as specific, but still what's meant by well-being is really can be different globally. So more description of what is meant by that. I agree with the nearly 70% of you there, even though we've not put it as our option here, it should be really. So we then had 6% there are target and baselines included. And the indicator measures more than one thing. I'm not sure in either case there that there are not really any targets or baselines there, just within the indicator. And I'm not sure it's measuring one thing. It's measuring one thing about, oh, okay, no, maybe on that, because well-being could be broken down, it being such a big element in itself. So interesting. Yeah, you could argue that. So our final one before we get it back into our presentation, so this one, training participants, so participants have engaged in training, their own rating of their skills. So training participants' rating of their skills. But actually slightly unintentionally badly written, but there we go. So what's wrong with this final indicator? Training participants' rating of their skills, what would you say is wrong with that? Apart from that, it's just really badly written. And just as you're voting, what I used to do, for some reason when I used to do polls, is actually to start to read out the responses, which just influences then whoever writes in. So I tend to keep quiet now. So we'll give it another 20 seconds to vote. Again, this one was training participants' rating of their skills. Okay, 10 more seconds. Brilliant, thank you all. So we're just going to close that one and then share the results. And so you can see that for us we'd had not clear and specific. So 60% agreed with that one. So the majority of you. 30% it measures more than one thing. Yeah, potentially, because skills is very general. I would agree with that. What are skills? You know, it's not specific enough, and in doing that, it's measuring more than one thing. And again, we had the no qualitative indicators. Well, maybe there, but that could be qualitative because it could be there just, for example, their written description of their skills. It could just be asking them in a focus group. That's probably actually more of a qualitative indicator. It's not sort of number or percentage of. It could actually be more general, but I do. If you're reading it as quantitative, then yeah, it could be another qualitative one there. So that's the end of that exercise. I really hope it was useful, just a bit of fun really, but also gives you an idea of some of the common errors that I come across and challenges I have with indicators and the writing of indicators. So yeah, so thank you all for engaging in that. If you took part, much appreciated, but fine if you just wanted to observe. So we've got now just under 20 minutes to go into the final sections of our webinar and the final sections of the form. So I will share my screen again. And we're going to come into the final two sections and one more section where we're going to take a closer look at a topic. So section 6 is on finance. And the first thing to mention here, so this is the total grant funding requested that you're asked to fill in. So please state the total amount, or it's important here just to state the total amount, but just to also check that your funding amount fits with the project length. So it's back to that table again, and the amount of that we looked at earlier, and the amount of funding available relating to the overall period of your project. And then we're now going to go into a bit more detail just from the Royal Academy on filling out this budget template. So this is available to you to download, and we've got 6 points just to tell you a bit more about filling it in. And again, these will be in the guides that we send out accompanying the training. So the first thing is the budget template is split into revenue costs and capital costs. And let me just highlight what I'm talking about as I go. Revenue costs are up here. You can see capital costs down here. So it's split into these two areas. And whilst the Academy do fund capital costs, any such purchases should be justified and clearly needed for the project implementation. And as we'll come to later, you do have a notes column. Don't worry that it's narrow. You can make it bigger. You can make it wider and deeper to add in more information. But remember, you do have that notes column, as we'll come to justify elements of the budget or to explain further. Let's get rid of my scribbling and come to the next point. So then the second point, the budget should be submitted to the Academy in British pound sterling. The template is for 3 years. So if your project is shorter than this, please delete unnecessary columns. So as you can see here, you can delete out, if your project is just 1 year, you can just delete out columns 2 and 3 and then submit it. It just makes it much clearer then to read. The next point, it's important that the figures are realistic and based on real quotes. If you have a finance department, please ask them to double check your budget before submitting it, as we mentioned earlier in our general advice on funding applications. Feel free to add headings and additional rows. An example of a heading could be selection of participants, and then you might list paper, pens, venue, chair hire, etc. Anything you need for that particular activity on one row each. So you can add additional rows and headings within here. So you might have a heading over here of, as I explained here, just of selection of participants, and then your list underneath. So you can break this down into more detail if you want to, or if you need to. So the Academy does accept budget line for bank charges, but they should be justified and described in the notes section over on the right here, how they've been calculated. It's important that budget activity is activity-based, so each budget line should be broken down in as much detail as you can. And finally, for projects over 6 months, a budget line for inflation is accepted, but again, it needs to be, the calculation needs to be included in the notes column. I know I repeat this a lot, but it's a lot to cover in a short space of time. It is all in your guide. You can go through this at your leisure in front of you as you fill out your budget. Okay, and then finally, our final topic to go into a bit more detail on is an interesting one. It was really interesting to research and to go into. For us as well, this is value for money. So have you considered value for money in your project design? So it's not always about getting the cheapest option, but about using resources well. So in this section, you address what you've done to address value for money with your project. And that, as I mentioned, is going to be our final topic of the day to go into. And we've come over to the white, or the flip chart again. So, value for money. What do we mean by value for money? Now, we've borrowed heavily from a couple of sources here, particularly DFID, because we really like, at InFocus, we really like their resources on value for money. Quite clear, I think. So anyway, the National Audit Office in the UK describe value for money as the optimum use of resources to achieve intended outcomes. And in DFID's program terms, what they mean by this is they want to maximize the impact of each pound spent to improve poor people's lives. That's the DFID definition of value for money, or their interpretation of it. And the DFID framework that they use, we're just going to zoom into here. So what they do is they look across elements of what would be included in a, if you imagine processes activities, then you recognize all of these from the, hopefully from the log frame above, input, process, output, outcome, impact. And they use these different terms, which are very common in value for money. We're going to just deal with 3 of them: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And these are 3 things to think through when you're filling in your value for money section. Now, I've got an example I'm hoping is going to make this clearer in a moment of us at InFocus. But before we do that, let's look at the DFID definitions a bit further, and I will just zoom in a bit further onto this. Otherwise, it might be still a bit small for you, so just give me a moment. I'm going to zoom in. So this is their 3 E's framework. It's actually 4 E's, but there we go, I guess, with cost effectiveness. And, 3 E's and a C, but there we go. So 3 E's framework. They look at economy. Are we or our agents buying inputs of the appropriate quality at the right price? I guess the best price. Not the cheapest price, but the best price. Inputs are things such as staff, consultants, raw materials, and the capital we use to produce our outputs. Efficiency, how well do we or our agents convert inputs into outputs? And effectiveness, how well are the outputs from an intervention achieving the desired outcome on a certain area, in this case poverty reduction for DFID. But I haven't gone further into those explanations, so I'm hoping I've got an example here that's going to help. So I'm using this from the basis, I'm imagining I'm filling in a proposal for InFocus. As you know, we develop training courses like this one. What would be a value for money approach for us? So let's have a look. Again, not about the cheapest option, but I think we've said that several times now. So inputs, remember these are the, so I've put up a little chain here, really just to remind you of these areas from the log frame earlier. I think it's a good way, like DFID did, of looking at where do these different terms come in. So inputs are what's needed to deliver activities. Activities are the key activities delivered throughout the project. Outputs are the things that happen as a direct result of project activities. Outcomes are then the changes coming out of the outputs and activities, and impact is that long-term goal in society. So, economy, let me zoom in a bit here. And I've just lost my, as I zoomed in, lost my place slightly. Let me just come back to that. I'm afraid it is a slight challenge with Prezi sometimes, is that you can lose your place. So I will just come back to that. Sorry about that. I just realised it would be good to zoom in a little more for you. Let's try that again. So economy. Are we buying things or services at the right price? That's what we mean here. So if we're developing a training course, what I would put in there is a day rate of one of our graphic designers that's appropriate for her skill and level of quality of work. So I have some designers I use who are probably a bit above the average of a consultant, but they do very good work. So I've been including here, this is a day rate, it is competitive, it may be a little higher, but it reflects the quality of their work. Now, also here for inputs, you might be, for example, saying that we put this out to tender, or that we've done research and we've found that this is a competitive price. It's not the cheapest, but it is, we realise in the sector competitive because we've done research or we put it out to tender. And that's really then how you can show economy. It's about how can you demonstrate that you are making an effort to get the best price possible for the inputs, be they people or resources. Then we've got efficiency. So this is a relationship between inputs and outputs. How well are we converting our inputs into outputs? And there's often a balance between time and quality here. So let's say I produce with my team, I produce a presentation, but in for a training course, but and the client is, I know they're going to be happy with the quality, but I say, look, it's going to take us 30 days of work. Well, that in our world wouldn't be particularly efficient for developing a presentation like this. It should be, it should be a handful of days really to do that, 5 or 10 or depending on the presentation. So we're not being particularly efficient. And things you could really mention here, which would show efficiency, would be, the experience and skill of your team. For example, that we've got the best people for the job that we can find, and therefore we feel they're going to be doing this in a, they're going to be efficient at how they take time and money and turn it into our outputs. Or you could say, look, we've already got these elements in place. So, I've got the structure of a training course or presentation that I can build on, and that's going to mean that this is going to be efficient. Or that you've run a mentoring program before, and we have all the resources from that program that we can build on. That would be efficiency. How well do you take the inputs and the resources and the money and the time and turn them into these outputs? And finally, we have effectiveness. So to what extent are our outputs and our activities leading to outcomes and eventually to impact? So here with us and with training, if I'm training people, how well does that lead to organisations of improving practice? If I'm training you all on completing the form with the academy, does that lead to stronger applications? Would be our sort of measure of effectiveness. So often here in your application form, it's about explaining why your model is going to be effective. And again, it could be we've done this before, we have experience with it, we've seen it happen before, or we have this research or evidence that show that our outputs will lead to outcomes. So I can say, I've been running training for 10 years, I can give you a body of evidence of how the training will turn into learning and that people then use that training. So that would be then effectiveness. So this is in the guide that will go out to you all, that you can have a look at. And that was really just a bit on value for money to help you to fill out that part of the application. And the final section, with only a couple of minutes to go to the Q&A, the final section of the form is the declaration. Really simple. So it's to be signed by the lead applicant, the lead contact, and from the lead organisation, showing that you understand that you will have to sign a contract, confirm the information is correct, that you agree to work with the academy to mitigate fraud, and that you agree that your application will be shared with external assessors. So this is really the final bit of the form to complete, and it just needs your name and position, and that effectively is the equivalent of, I guess, of well, it is of signing it once you then tick the box underneath. And that's really it. So thank you all for your time over the last 2.5 hours. I hope it's been useful. Just say we've still got half an hour to go, and this is really for the Q&A section of the call. So it's more where, well, unless you have questions for me on the more theory-based content risk assessment log frames, and I'm happy to answer and try to answer, but it may be more likely perhaps, or that you've got questions for Louise and for Meredith. I think Louise primarily, given the specifics here, on the actual application form itself and any questions that you have on that. So the way that we're going to run this is just that you've got 2 options for questions that have come up from the webinar. You can either put up your hand if you would like to, again, it feels very much like a classroom, if you would like to come into the call and speak to us and ask a question, then please do that, and we can bring you in and ask the question. The other option is just to type your question into the question box, and then that we'll pick it up and we'll answer it, and you don't have to come into the call to speak if you don't want to. So Louise, anything to add there, or shall we see if there are questions from the group?
No, I think that's great. I'd like to thank you, Tom, for all that information. It's been great, and thanks to everyone for participating in the exercises. We've had a couple of questions coming in during the webinar, but yeah, otherwise let's open the floor for any questions regarding either the presentation, about the project, the program itself, about the objectives, or if there's anything in general that you want to ask Meredith or I about the Academy, anything you'd like to ask. If you do feel like you want to have a think about what's been said and you want to ask us questions later, I want to highlight as well that you can always send an email or contact me via phone, or we can have a Skype conversation. So just inviting you to do ask questions, and please do get in touch. I might start with the question that we got in actually at the beginning of the webinar, which was about how the grant sizes are categorized. And it's just going back to the small, medium, large sizes that we have. I'm not sure, Tom, if you might be able to bring up that again.
Yeah, I was just thinking to do that actually. Yeah, just bring it up. There you go.
Thank you. So yeah, as we've stated here, this is basically based on the Academy's budgets for this program, and we are looking to give out around 2 grants within each band. That obviously depends on how many applications we get within each band, so that there might be some flexibility there, but just to look at the total budget size, and for the small grants to make sure that they are a maximum of 12 months, medium grants between £80,000 and £160,000, a maximum of 24 months, and the large ones up to £300,000 up to a maximum of 36 months. That's not saying that you can't apply for a large grant that is 24 months, because it's up to a maximum of 36 months. But I would like to recommend you to look at, you know, your current experience of managing grants of this size, your annual budget, because if you have, as Tom was mentioning, we ask you to submit your financial records of the previous year, and if you've had an annual income of £20,000, it's very unlikely that we will be granting you 300,000, because that would be too much of a step up from the previous budget. So that's just a small recommendation within that.
Great. Okay, should we? We've got a question from Dan as well. If you've seen that one, Louise.
Yeah. So the question is, in your experience, how long do organizations tend to need to allow to complete an application?
That is a really, really good question, and I think the webinar alone will have shown just how detailed some of this information that we are asking for is. What will also be clear is if you're an organisation that has filled in a number of such grant requests in the past, you may well already have versions of risk registers and some of the things that we are asking for that can be adapted, of course, whereas some organisations will really need to be starting this from scratch, which will, of course, take longer. I think what we would recommend is to download the form, think about all the ways, perhaps offline, in which the different sections can be filled in, and then once you go online, of course, it won't take more than an hour. But if the information is already prepared, I think, you know, we've given a very long window in terms of the length of time that this grant scheme is open, partly because of the creation of partnerships and wanting to give people enough time to really pull together the best proposal. This is a very, very long-winded way of saying I think it's going to vary hugely. I think it could, if you were creating everything from scratch, I think it could well take a couple of days of work, but hopefully a lot of it will already be in mind or on file, and then it's about adapting it for this particular proposal. I don't know if there's anything else you can add, Louise, because it is a difficult one, this. How long's a piece of string?
Yeah, no, I think I fully agree with that, Meredith. The one thing I would say is, I guess, to start as soon as possible, and especially working on those partnerships and make sure that all partners involved are agreeing on what's going into the project application.
Yeah.
We do have this year, which is different to the pilot grant scheme, is that you can have co-applicants. So any partner can help fill in the application. However, it has to be submitted, and the declaration needs to be signed by the lead application. Lead applicant. So yeah, hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Great, thank you. And we did have so Dan's just thanked you for that. So I think that answered the question. We've got we did have Nadi, I think, who had their hands raised but had just gone offline, which so often happens with an online webinar. So I just wanted to actually ask the question too, which I didn't ask in the build-up to you both, but how are applications assessed? You mentioned there's a external assessors potentially. What's the, if you don't mind me asking, what the process is for that, because that's what popped into my head as we went through.
Yeah, absolutely. So the process is that it's being submitted online. We're having staff here at the Academy going through and checking the applications against the eligibility criteria. And once they've gone through that stage, we have at least 2 people from the steering group reviewing each application and then scoring them. And then once that's done, there will be a meeting where the steering group is coming together and having a discussion around each application, and the ones who have not been reading the applications get a short brief on what the application is about, and then both of the members who've been reading and scoring the application will make a case for or against that application.
Got it, okay. So obviously less for me because I'm not applying, but it just jumped into my head as something that would be useful to know as I was going through the presentation. So thank you for that. We do have Nadi, if I'm presenting your name, pronouncing your name correctly, just with a hand raised. But I think that just to check. Nadi, did you have a question there for us? I've just brought you off mute.
Everything. If I was in an awkward social situation. I tried to put my phone away.
Oh. No, I'm not sure. We could just lose them there. If they could hear us. I could hear some background noise, but not Nadi. So I think that might be our questions for today. If anybody has any other questions, just please do raise your hand. The whole webinar is still here. All the participants are still in. But yeah, just let us know either by raising your hand or typing a question in. And maybe Louise and Meredith give it another minute or so just to see if any crop up.
Absolutely. And if there is anyone who has questions, like I said, they can always contact us after the webinar as well. Just to kind of add in while we're waiting to see if anyone else has any questions, just to say that we will be sending out a survey of this webinar later on today, and it would be great if you could just take a couple of minutes. It's only going to be 9 questions, really quick, and if you could all take your time and please respond to that, that would be highly appreciated.
Great, thank you. And we do have another question. This one's from Bob Pullen. So shall I read that one out and then for you to answer, Louise? So it's just come in on the questions. So do you expect the phase 2 proposals to include the valuable outcomes of phase 1 pilot studies? If so, is there an assessment of these outcomes available as a guide for project planners? If not, should we develop our phase 2 proposal on the basis of our pilot study?
That is a very good question. I think absolutely the organizations who have been carrying out pilot studies under GCRF Africa Catalyst, I think it's very important to include lessons learned and your outcomes from this. There is a question under the organizational information, which is what is your organization's experience relevant to this project? That, for example, would be a good place to include anything about the pilot project and how that has helped shape this. And also under the rationale for the project, the justification and background would be another good place to include this. Is there an assessment of these outcomes available as a guide for project planners? Yeah. For those of you who have taken part in the pilot project, do feel free to contact me via email, and then we can share some of the midterm evaluation results with you. And also, if there's anything you want to discuss in more detail, you can contact me and we can talk about projects more on an individual level, because all the 15 pilot projects are very different, so it would be difficult to share with all of you for all of the projects. That makes sense.
Absolutely, but certainly we were very conscious that we wanted to take as much learning as we could from the pilot projects going into phase 2. And also not have too long of a break between them. So we ended up undertaking a midterm evaluation of these pilot projects. So while they don't showcase the full impact of the 6-month pilot projects, they did give us an opportunity to look at what was working and what wasn't working currently, so that the judging and steering group could take that into consideration for setting the phase 2 grant So yes and no. It's an evolving conversation with regards to all the impacts and measuring those and making sure we're aware of them and that they fully are reflected in phase 2. But we do have a midterm evaluation which has helped shape this. And as Louise said, very, very happy to discuss that with the people who ran these pilots.
Those of you who were not part of the pilot projects, if you want to see what the recommendations were, we will in the next few weeks publish a short response to the recommendations, because the evaluators made a set of recommendations for what the next phase should look like. So the Academy has prepared a response to why we decided to go with this or why we decided not to. Because the design of this pilot phase is, like Meredith said, based on the midterm evaluation, but also on other stakeholder meetings.
Okay, great, thank you. So I hope that helped, Bob. And feel free to raise your hand if you want to come in and ask anything further on that. It's no problem. And I think, yeah, that there are no more questions there. Bob, you've got your hand raised, so is it? I'll just bring you into the call. Hi there.
Hi, good afternoon. Bob Pullen here.
Hi there.
Hello, Louise. Glad to hear you again. Thanks for your answer. Can you hear me? Am I on the air?
Yeah, you're very clear.
You are.
It's nice to hear your voice, Bob.
Okay, good show. Really, this is a fixed question that I put to you, and it's got to do with expectations that were raised during the pilot study. And I think the best way for us to go in our particular case, which is not going to be the same as all the others, is to enter into a discussion with you offline how best to manage expectations and make the best outcome possible down in the study area in Swaziland in our case. And then the other part of it, which is an even bigger question, is whether there's merit in trying to implement the recommendations that we ended up with elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, but we need to know where those conditions are going to be fertile ground for doing the job properly. So I think the best is we into an offline discussion, either electronically or Skype or something. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bob. I think that's very valuable points, and yes, managing expectations is obviously crucial. And although phase 2 is open to anyone, one of the things is obviously that many of the pilot projects were kind of startups for other projects, and we do have in the application guidelines, which are downloadable on the website, a set of questions that the assessors, the steering group will be using when they're looking at applications. And if a pilot project has been delivered well and reports have been submitted on time and it has been honest and ongoing communication, this is obviously something that's going to weigh the application positively. That's not saying that we would exclude anyone else, but that's the way we can look at this. In terms of taking it to other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, I think that's a good point. And obviously, for the larger project, it would be positive if it's benefiting as many people as possible. So I think that's the advice we can give on that point.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, and thanks for coming to the call, Bob, as well. So Cecil, you have your hand raised there. We could bring you into the call. Do you have a question at all?
I'm Engineer Cecil from Rwanda. I don't know if you are hearing me, but I have one question. Sometimes when you are thinking about a project, you are also thinking about potential stakeholders. When you are starting a project, you may have some of those stakeholders as responding negatively. What can be advised on you are along the way, you have already started the project, some of them they are maybe going slowly and responding whatever you are requesting. So what can be the advice on that way?
If I can, Cecil, we've got a bit of background noise for you. If I can just summarise for the group, just to see if I've understood, if that's okay.
It is a common, it is a general question about the project. You have explained about the how you can apply, how the process, the whole process, which is really which I'm appreciating really. But I would like to know, when you have you are starting a project, you think about stakeholders who can be involved in that project. On the long, when you have already started the project, some of the stakeholders are responding negatively. Maybe they are not willing to support. What can be the advice on that way?
Ah, very interesting. Okay, so you've selected stakeholders, you started the project, and stakeholders are responding negatively, and there are issues with those stakeholders and how to manage that. Yeah, well, I have thoughts, but Rhys or Meredith, if there's an organisation with this situation, how would you deal with that?
I'm not clear I got the whole of that question, but if there's a project that has already started, does that...
Yeah, so if I could just summarise that for you, because it was that there is some background noise, and see if I've got this correct. But so the project started, stakeholders have been and partners have been selected, but then there are some challenges with working with those stakeholders, or they respond negatively. Once the project started, how do you deal with that situation? Is that, Cecil, is that someone? Oh, I think, yeah, that we might have lost Cecil there, but that was the, I could just hear, and I think that with the background noise, and that was, I think, the challenge Cecil identified. So does that make sense to you, Rhys?
Yeah, I mean that's a difficult one, and I guess that's part of the project management. Is how do you plan for working with potential negativity from stakeholders? So absolutely, that's something you can build in terms of time. So have extended time for the project. It might take longer to start because you might have some negative stakeholders that you need to convince before the project is up and running. In terms of if the project has already started, I presume that's, I mean, the project shouldn't really have started before the funds are committed, unless it's an ongoing project and you need to look at additional funding to keep the project running, which should then be clarified in the rationale section. Does that answer the question?
Oh, I'll see, because there was lots of background noise. I had to take Cecil just off.
Yes, yes.
Cecil, did that answer? Yeah, perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecil.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. And I guess, Louise, it's also something that could be in the risk assessment section too, just about working with partners. And we have, for us, we've had, you know, we've selected a partner and an expert to work with us on a project, and then it's just not worked out because you haven't always just worked with them before. We didn't have that relationship, and then realize actually this is not going to work and had to replace them. And I mean, it could definitely come into the risk assessment too if you're working with a partner for the first time, and a partner or a stakeholder, and then there are challenges with them. That might be somewhere to address it as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's also important to point out here that as part of the partner section, to make sure that all partners that are involved on a project management level, that everyone's on board and are clear about their roles and responsibilities before the application goes in.
Definitely, there's a mitigation in effect, isn't it? To have that in place, so for that particular risk, definitely. Great. Okay, I think there are no more questions. If anybody, perhaps we do what we have done before and give them a minute and see if anybody raises their hand or types in a question. Otherwise, I think we might have exhausted the questions. Although I have said that twice already, so let's see. Maybe just while we're waiting, just so our plan, Louise, just to confirm to the group, is to get out the recording of the webinar. And I had some emails with people just struggling with their connection, trying to get in as well. So for them to, but also the resources that we've mentioned, the guide, which goes through all of this as well. I think we plan to get out as soon as possible. We talked about Friday morning to get it out by then, just to let the group know. And so that will be our next step. So I think, Louise, and Meredith, I think any questions now can come through we can send out details in the follow-up email, but could perhaps go over to yourself from this point forward. So we don't have any more on our list. And I guess it just remains to thank everybody and for all of your time, and especially from my side for engaging in the exercises as well, because that always makes it a lot more fun and a lot more interesting when you all do that. And I hope it's been useful for you, and I'll just perhaps pass over to Louise for any final words.
Thank you so much. Like we said, any questions, get in touch, and otherwise, thank you all for your time and being engaged.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. We look forward to the applications.
Great, perfect. And a final note, just to leave the webinar, all you need to do is click on the cross at the top of your screen. I often forget to say that, and I've got people then just sat in my webinars, but you've got a little cross at the top right of the screen. You can click on that to come out of the webinar, but we'll be shutting it down soon as well. So have good remainders of the day wherever you are, and thank you again.
Thank you.